I never imagined that a simple trip to the grocery store to pick up a few essentials could turn into an experience that felt like it belonged in a scripted comedy of absurdity, complete with an overzealous neighbor, the intervention of law enforcement, and a lesson about entitlement so vivid that it has stayed with me long after the incident, shaping the way I view human behavior and the fragile boundaries between personal choice and someone else's imagined authority. The day began like any other, the sun casting a warm, golden light over the streets as I walked toward the small neighborhood store, with a reusable shopping bag in hand, feeling a subtle but satisfying sense of nostalgia as I jingled the coins in my wallet, appreciating the tangible, tactile nature of cash, something that has always grounded me in the reality of transactions in a way digital numbers simply cannot, and unaware that this ordinary action would soon provoke someone else's ire. The store itself was the kind of place that feels familiar to anyone who has grown up in the area, with linoleum floors worn smooth by decades of foot traffic, aisles lined with neatly stacked produce and goods, the hum of fluorescent lights blending with a soft, ambient playlist that drifts over the heads of shoppers, creating a calm but alert atmosphere that is neither chaotic nor entirely quiet, the perfect backdrop for routine errands until disruption arrives uninvited. I moved through the store slowly, taking my time to select fresh vegetable, milk, bread, and a few other staples, savoring the simple satisfaction of shopping without haste. The rustle of paper bags and the soft squeak of carts creating a rhythm of normalcy, and I noticed a woman near the entrance, a figure whose presence immediately drew my attention not because she was being loud or intrusive, but because the intensity of her gaze was almost tangible, as if she were scanning the aisles for infractions that did not exist, her body rigid, posture immaculate, eyes sharp and calculating. She was in her late 40s, dressed perfectly, hairstyled as if ready for a photo shoot, and carried herself like a neighborhood authority whose powers were self-declared, rather than legally granted. The type of person who interprets small deviations from personal preference as moral failings or threats to public order, and I instinctively sensed that our encounter, however brief it might initially seem, would not end quietly. I proceeded to the checkout line, carefully placing my items on the conveyor belt, taking out a mix of bills and coins from my wallet with deliberate care, the rustle of cash a comforting counterpoint to the impersonal swipe of cards, unaware that my choice of payment had already caught the attention of the woman, who now stepped closer with an expression of disbelief and indignation, leaning slightly toward the cashier as if proximity could amplify the moral weight of her complaint. She asked, loud enough for the cashier and a few nearby shoppers to hear, why I was paying with cash, implying that such a practice was not only outdated but somehow suspicious, as though the use of physical currency were equivalent to lawbreaking, a notion so ridiculous it might have been laughable if delivered less aggressively, and I realized instantly that she had framed a perfectly legal transaction as a problem worthy of escalation. I looked at her, maintaining calm, and explained politely that cash is still legal tender, widely accepted, and that many people, including myself, prefer it for budgeting and personal convenience, emphasizing that there was no law requiring the use of credit or debit cards. But she was unmoved, shaking her head in disdain, muttering something about people refusing to follow modern standards and implying that my behavior was creating unnecessary stress for everyone around her, which drew a few awkward glances from other shoppers who clearly sensed the absurdity, but hesitated to intervene. The cashier, clearly uncomfortable, asked if there was a problem, as she immediately responded that the police should be called, as though my choice of payment were a public safety issue requiring law enforcement, her tone commanding enough that it briefly created a ripple of tension across the otherwise mundane checkout area, and I stood there for a moment, stunned, trying to comprehend how ordinary cash could have been transformed into a perceived threat. I reiterated calmly that I was paying with my own money, that no law had been broken, and that there was no need for police involvement, but she waved my explanation aside, insisting that paying with cash was inherently suspicious and that my refusal to comply with her perceived standard demanded intervention, and the store manager, alerted by the rising tension, arrived to assess the situation. The manager, a middle-aged man with a calm, professional demeanor, asked her directly what the issue was, and she recounted the story with animated gestures, emphasizing every point, as though dramatizing the threat, describing me as someone who refused to conform to contemporary norms, and suggesting that my presence and method of payment warranted scrutiny or action, a performance that drew even more attention from shoppers nearby who watched with a mix of disbelief and quiet amusement. The manager turned to me, asking if my payment was legitimate, and I confirmed, carefully handing over the bills and coins while explaining once more that this was a normal, legal transaction that caused no harm or disruption. And yet Karen was undeterred, raising her phone and loudly announcing that she was calling the police, ensuring that everyone in the vicinity could hear that law enforcement would soon arrive to address what she had framed as a crisis. Within minutes, 2 officers arrived, walking calmly into the store, taking in the scene with the professional detachment of people accustomed to handling complaints that falls somewhere between trivial and absurd, and asked Karen to explain why she had made the call, at which point she launched into a dramatic monologue, insisting that my cash payment was unusual, potentially fraudulent, and indicative of suspicious behavior, gesturing at me repeatedly to reinforce her narrative and clearly expecting the officers to act on her assumptions. The officers then turned to me, asking for my version, and I patiently explained that paying with cash is legal, commonplace, and entirely unremarkable, that I had purchased the items myself and intended no deception or disruption, and that the escalation was the result of her personal discomfort rather than any illegal action on my part. One officer then asked her to provide evidence that a crime had occurred, and when she faltered, citing nothing more than her opinion that cash is outdated and suspicious, the officers calmly explained that her interpretation does not constitute a legal violation and that no further action would be taken, clarifying that personal discomfort or preference is not a valid reason for police involvement. Her face tightened as disbelief replaced indignation, and when she demanded to know whether the officers were simply letting this go, they calmly reaffirmed that my actions were lawful and routine, emphasizing that the call itself was inappropriate and that no charges or warnings would be issued, leaving her momentarily speechless as reality clashed with her sense of entitlement. After a few tense moments, she muttered under her breath and left the store abruptly, clearly frustrated but powerless, while I completed my transaction and left with my groceries, feeling a strange mix of relief, validation, and lingering disbelief that a normal, lawful behavior had been escalated into a spectacle simply because it deviated from someone else's arbitrary expectations. As I walked to my car, carrying the bags in both hands, I noticed a few shoppers giving me sympathetic glances, likely aware of the absurdity yet unwilling to intervene, and I reflected on how quickly ordinary interactions can be warped into conflict when someone projects authority without justification. A reminder that entitlement often finds its stage in mundane situations where rules are misapplied or invented entirely. Over the following days, I returned to the same store multiple times, always paying with cash, and Karen never appeared again, likely realizing that her attempt to enforce an imaginary standard had no effect on reality, while I quietly enjoyed the sense of victory in continuing to live normally, demonstrating that simple, lawful actions cannot be undermined by personal bias when met with calm, measured persistence. The incident remained with me not because of confrontation or fear, but because it highlighted a subtle truth about human behavior. Ordinary, legal actions can be reframed as threatening in the mind of someone who equates personal discomfort with authority, and the most effective response is patience, consistency, and a refusal to yield to baseless pressure, which ultimately exposes the absurdity of entitlement when confronted with reality. In the end, paying with cash had not only fulfilled my immediate need for groceries, but had also become a quiet act of defiance, a testament to the idea that normal, lawful behavior does not require validation from those who would prefer to rewrite reality to suit their own sense of order, and that sometimes the best revenge is simply living as you wish, calmly and without apology, while those who attempt to control you are left frustrated and powerless.